Hi, and welcome back. I'm Simi Lerner, and this is Judaism from Within, the podcast where we go through the ideas of Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch. Today we are discussing repentance, Teshuvah. Now, before we think, well, we know that already, this approach is different. This approach is transformative. This approach, I truly believe, will affect how you look at this concept. Rav Hirsch's analysis and his appreciation of the human condition truly comes out here, and also the uniqueness of Judaism. But before we jump into it, once again, we are going through Chorev, Rav Hirsch's articulation of the reasons for the commandments from a understandable standpoint, appreciating Judaism from its own standpoint, as we say, from within. Using our reason, using the greater appreciation of the Jewish tradition that Rav Hirsch had, and how he integrated it seamlessly into his understanding of the commandments. So let us begin with today's topic, and I think it's worth approaching it from two standpoints. Both of them, I think, are unique to Rav Hirsch. The first one is the nature of sin itself. What I mean by that is, when we think of a sin, we think of something profoundly bad. A person has sinned, a person has missed, a person has not lived up to their values. But there is a positive angle to this as well. The nature of free will. Your ability to sin, and this is deeply rooted in Rav Hirsch's approach to a korban chatos, to failure in general, your ability to sin isn't a bug, it's a feature of the system. And this is an important distinction to make, and we will develop it. The second is the nature of confession, and how it is transformative, because in Rav Hirsch's eyes, you are not confessing to God. Now that sounds bizarre, but let's work it through. So the classical stages of Teshuvah. What is Teshuvah? You say sorry. You did something wrong, you say sorry. Excellent. Sounds lovely. But now let's take it further. The key component of Teshuvah is confession. Now this will be, I think, our first move. Rav Hirsch appreciates the word vidui, as it's written in the Torah, v'hisvado. Without going into the grammar explicitly, it's a reflexive term. It's used in the reflexive, meaning when you confess, you're not confessing to God. And that's the assumption we have. I confess on Yom Kippur to God, on the day that is designated for confession. But Rav Hirsch points out, you are not confessing to God. You are confessing to yourself. Very similar to Rav Hirsch's understanding of prayer, lehit palel, to judge the self, without opening that conversation about what is prayer and the relationship to prayer and the individual in his life. When you confess, you are confessing to the self. That might sound counterintuitive. I confess to God. Now, Rav Hirsch doesn't think God isn't present during your confession, but if we want confession both to make sense experientially and religiously, well, God knows what you did. What good would there be of telling God? So in essence, everybody kind of agrees you're doing it for yourself. Because when I confess, what am I doing? And Rav Hirsch points this out. I am articulating verbally, not as a statement or a proposition. It's an act of discovery, if you will. I articulate that I failed in this area. What am I saying implicitly there? That I could have done better. By saying I did wrong, I am implying within that statement, I envision a world that I could have done differently. And thereby, that is the first step towards growth. Because without admitting what you've done is wrong, there's no chance of change. Confession is the first step towards genuine change. So, the first step of our understanding of Teshuvah, and I think the most transformative, is the nature of confession itself. Not to God, but to man, rooted in the language of the Torah. When it talks about confession, it talks about our ability to change. We confess to the self. By saying I could have done better, by saying I failed in this area, I am also saying I could have done better. That makes the act of confession transformative. I become a different person through the act of genuine confession, not confessing to the priest or confessing to... You're confessing to yourself. You are expressing, you are articulating as an act of a performative act. I did wrong here, and I could have done better. And I think this is, I suppose, the most basic takeaway from Rav Hirsch's understanding of Teshuvah, but let's develop it in a more broader sense. Let's look at it in a more meta perspective. Rav Hirsch understands that God both invites you on your mission, but also calls on you to return when you leave. Now, why is this important? What does it mean God also calls upon you to return when you leave from your ascribed duty, your responsibility in this world? Because there's an interesting distinction that is important in this area. Teshuvah, or failure, or not living up to our values, isn't a bug of the system. A bug meaning a problem. It's a feature. It's a genuine way the world should ideally be. And this distinction in the world of perhaps programming, a bug is something you need to get rid of in an ideal way. A feature is that it's there for a reason. And this is Rav Hirsch's understanding of chet in general. A chet, a carbon chatos, has a moral dimension to it that is profoundly inspiring. When you sin, and you are able to confess that you didn't live up to your values, when you do confession, you're expressing your ability to live in the world with freedom. Without your ability to sin, freedom would be meaningless, and the fire, if you will, the divine fire that we all contain, the most important aspect of Judaism, a religious system, or anything meaningful, is your ability to choose. And chet is that beacon that you can choose. Rav Hirsch's understanding of the chet of Adam and Chava isn't that they were cursed at the end. He says that's a wrong reading of the story. Adam and Eve were never cursed. The conditions in which they enacted their freedom changed, or was cursed. The land was cursed. Thereby, the environment that they were in, where their free will was manifest, changed. They weren't cursed. They had free will from beginning. If there was no free will, the story would be silly. The story would be a game. The story would be a puppet show. But that's not Judaism. Judaism is a genuine mission with real stakes. We went into the idea previously of a bracha. For Rav Hirsch, a bracha is, I bless God by committing myself to the furthering of God's goals. That is the foundational idea of Judaism. And without that, it's a game. Without that, it's a mere simulation. Rav Hirsch understands the idea of freedom being central to so much, from purity, impurity, idolatry, and so much more. Because without freedom, it's meaningless. With freedom, it has meaning. And that is what a chet is a beacon to. A chet, an ability to sin, is the beacon to this free aspect of our experience. Thereby, there's a positive side to it as well. The fact that I failed means failure is possible, which means the mission really matters, because I can mess it up. And then next time, through the act of confession, I look at myself and I say, I failed in this area. And next time I can do better. Next time I can push to do better. Which means when we do fail, inevitably, the greatest amongst us fail. It's not because the system's flawed, or because of someone's messing up at the beginning. It's the ideal. Failure is part of the game. My wife Rivka uses the metaphor of a ship, and I think it's a powerful metaphor, because the way she expresses it is a ship is safe in a harbour. But that's not what a ship is for. Meaning, if you stay at home and you don't move, for sure you'll feel safe, but that's not living out your purpose. This is the same idea that Rav Hirsch draws out. A chet means sin is possible, thereby the mission is real. So, let's recap. We spoke about the idea of Teshuvah. We spoke about the idea of vidui, repentance, and repenting means confessing to the self, because confessing to the self makes change possible. Just the very act of confession isn't the articulation of a statement, it's a transformative act, because I say to myself, I recognize in myself, I could have done better. We then spoke about the nature of sin itself, and how the nature of sin itself is a positive stand to the reality of freedom. That because we can sin, we are truly free. When we strive, we struggle. That struggle is real. And it's not a bug of the system because of man's failure of eating from the tree. No, it was a part of the system. It was a feature of the system. It is what makes the system real and meaningful. As always, thank you so much for your time, and until next time, have a wonderful week.